Joining us now is Dr. Mohana, and she is an award-winning author. She teaches at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. That's VCUQ. That's part of their Education City complex there, which I visited. Fascinating place. Level of education is breathtaking. In fact, you know what? Just before I get her on, one of the reasons I believe that the Gang of Four blockade against Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, why it failed, is because they completely misjudged the competence of the Qatari people and the Qatari government because of their level of education and things of that nature. I mean, they basically thought, hey, we can do this blockade, things will fall apart, they won't be able to get basic goods and they'll capitulate to our needs. And the exact opposite happened. The whole thing blew up in their face. It's been the biggest disaster blockade in the history of blockades ever. You can't get a worse blockade than this. It backfired on them. And I think one of the reasons is the Qatari people are so educated. So many of them have a degree, and the government officials are educated highly. And so within government, they're highly competent. That's one of the things I get out of this whole thing. And anyway, joining us now, Dr. Mohana. She's a graduate of the University of Florida in Gainesville. So I'm a Ram, she's a Gator. But we're still friends, right? Except when we play basketball. Then we're not. Dr. Mohana, good to have you with us.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. And basketball is the creator of many enemies, for sure.
It really is the creator of many enemies. So, look, tell us about why you went to let's just start there. Why did you go to the States from Doha, from Qatar, and come to the University of Florida? What was inspired that?
Well, I originally moved to Qatar in 2005. To take up a job actually at Georgetown University. I was finishing my PhD at the University of Florida, and my specialty is actually Islam and Muslim women. That's my degree of expertise. And so I had never lived in an Islamic country. I moved to the U.S. when I was 5 with my parents from India. And so that had always been a goal of mine. And so I was in my 20s and I wanted an adventure. So that's what I did.
Adventures are great, and now you're a noted author, and you've written several books on the life as a Muslim woman, as you've seen it. Can you kind of expound for our audience on some of the key things that you have found, Doctor?
Well, so I've written novels that are set in Qatar, and so they kind of let readers go in, readers that might not be able to travel because they don't have the finances or they have other considerations, family, young children, that kind of thing, but they would love to travel the world. So the novels are a way of kind of traveling the world, through reading. And so there are 2 series. One is a romance series, and the other series is the crime series, and they're set in the Gulf. And I think one of the things that people always comment on when they're reading the books, reviewers on Amazon and other places, that they really see themselves in the passions and the desires and the goals and the ambitions that Qataris are just like any other people. They want the same things. They want to be happy. They want to fall in love. They want their children to be safe. All those kinds of things. And so that's really why I set out to write the books, is because I thought this is a part of the world that you don't hear about very much. And I definitely think people would love to know more about it.
So I want to talk about your time in the Gulf and some of the various countries that you've been in. And can you define one of the things when I went to Qatar, and I've been to many places, that was my first trip to the Gulf. One of the things that I was shocked by, that I always tell people, they say, what did you get out of that particular trip that took my breath away, was what I saw on the street, because I had no guides or anything like that. I just walked and talked to people, was what appeared to be the unbelievable, breathtaking liberation of women in the state of Qatar. Did I have that right as compared to other countries in the Middle East?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think that they're definitely, Qatari women are very, very mobile. They participate in society. They get educated. They work. So I wouldn't say that they've necessarily been liberated from anything. They've always had all those freedoms and all of that power given to them by their own society and by their own people. And I would say that with the exception of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, so Kuwait, Yemen, Oman, the UAE, which includes Dubai, women in the Gulf have generally enjoyed a really high-profile place in society. So I think that does surprise a lot of people, but that's really, women have been able to drive in Qatar since 1996. I drive. I've lived there for 13 years, and I've been driving the whole time. So that's definitely one of the things that people pick up on right away.
Is it possibly the difference because perhaps the highest profile nation in the Gulf is the Saudis, and we look at some of the restrictions on women that they have, and then I guess for the layman on the outside that's not been there, that almost becomes a standard. Is that fair?
I don't know. It's interesting. Saudi, obviously, when you look at the trajectory of the Gulf, everyone found oil at different points, each of the countries. Mm-hmm. So Saudi found it first, then Kuwait, then Dubai, Bahrain for a while, and Qatar, the development, the oil infrastructure came the most recently. And so I think the reason we know about Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia has occupied such a big space in the U.S. media when it comes to the Middle East is because they've been on the scene, quote unquote, as it were, and they regulate OPEC. They set the oil prices since the 70s, whereas the Qataris are much newer to the scene since the last 90s. But what they've been able to do since discovering oil and getting petrodollars and putting that back into the country has been very, very interesting.
We're with Dr. Mohana. She's in Doha, Qatar, and she is a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. That's part of Education City. She's got a PhD. That's why we call her doctor. And she graduated from the University of Florida, of all places, in Gainesville. She's the author of a couple of books, Love Comes Later and its sequel, Pearls of the Past, literary romance novels that pulls back the veil on life in the Gulf to reveal a glimpse of Muslim life seen by Westerners. So as a Muslim woman, as you go through your novels, what are some of the specific challenges that Muslim women face that people in America or in the West really wouldn't grasp?
So I think one of the things that has been really important lately is that I think people in the Muslim world feel very misunderstood, by the media and by people who maybe have never traveled to the Middle East or have never been to a mosque. In that, there are people in each category. Certainly we have Christian extremists, we have Muslim extremists or Jewish extremists. And it's very frustrating, I think, when the Muslim extremists come to represent the whole of the Muslim world, which is, 1 billion people.
How do you change that, Dr. Mohana?
I think that by conversations like this, it's not easy, especially when you're working with a deeply ingrained narrative. And that takes a lot of time. I think social media helps as well because you can see, we could right now pull up a dozen accounts. So right now in Qatar, it's about, I think, 5 p.m. So we could look at what people are doing in Doha. They're probably walking on the Corniche. They're driving home from work. They might be taking a nap. They might be working out. So I have a lot of hope, but I think it's definitely going to take a lot of specific, intentional advocacy to help change that narrative.
And so for Muslim women, as they're going forward in this journey, you talked about some of the liberties they now have in the Gulf, certainly being able to drive in your country since, what, you said 96, just getting that opportunity in Saudi Arabia. What is the risk here that some of these freedoms get rolled back? I mean, there was one school of thought. There is one school of thought from people I talked to about the embargo, the blockade. One school of thought was that the Saudis were really concerned about the liberty given to Qatari women and other people in the lower Gulf that might transmit its way back to Saudi Arabia. And like, I think somebody that said to me, one of the street vendors said, once you let liberty and freedom out of a bottle, like you can't put the cap back on. I mean, you think that's one of the concerns that some of the Middle Eastern countries might have about Muslim women, is that they're striving for additional freedom that perhaps is uncomfortable to some of the regimes?
Well, I mean, when you look at places like Lebanon, for example, even Egypt, women, just because women are in the Middle East, I don't think they necessarily feel oppressed. That's definitely something that we see through our lens, because maybe they look different or they dress differently. You know, I'm not Muslim, but I became interested in Islam, and in particularly the way gender and Islam interact, because my family is from India. And so one thing that's really interesting is I think that all sort of kind of viewpoints treat women the same. So Hindu extremists treat women the same way as Muslim extremists is the same way as Christian extremists, right? That women are to be quiet, they're not to be seen or heard, their role is in the family, and that they should, you know, be busy having babies, and they don't really have a role anywhere else in public life. So I think in the Middle East, where you see that right now most prominently is probably Saudi Arabia. I'm not really, off the top of my head, aware of any other country in the Middle East that kind of positions or pigeonholes women quite as much as they do. And to the Saudi women's credit, they have been, you know, fighting for their rights. There are Saudi women who have gone to prison because they want to drive, because they want to be able to travel, you know, without having to take permission from their family members. So the women of Saudi Arabia are definitely, you know, aware of the rights and the lives that their friends, sisters, cousins, sister-in-laws have all throughout the Gulf, and they're fighting for their rights, and they're very brave. And you know, I can't imagine what that's like.
That's fascinating. We're with Dr. Mohana. She is a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, part of Education City in Doha, the state of Qatar. She's a graduate from the University of Florida, right here in the United States in Gainesville, Florida. She's also the author of two noted works, Love Comes Later and its sequel, Pearls of the Past. You can get those at Amazon Bookstore or your favorite bookstore. Easiest thing, just go to Amazon. Life Comes Later and Pearls of the Past. Dr. Mohana, let me ask you this. What, in your view, having spent extensive time in the United States and in the Gulf and the Middle East, studying Muslim women, what is the biggest misconception Americans have about Muslim women?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. I would say it would probably have to do with the veil, so the headscarf. I think there's a perception that a lot of people think that women are forced to wear the headscarf. And I'm not saying that there aren't some people that are, you know, that decision is made for them, but I would say they're in the tiny, tiny majority. Most of the women that you see in the U.S., abroad, and certainly in the Middle East are wearing the headscarf because they want to, they feel that is their way to live their faith, and that they are fulfilling their religious duties by doing that. And I think that would surprise people, because the scarf has been used for a long time as a visible way of saying, oh, look how they treat their women. But what's interesting is, as a woman living in the Middle East, I actually feel much safer in the Middle East as a woman, because, and especially if I decide to wear the abaya, which is the long cloak that women wear in the Gulf and in other parts of the Muslim world, in Pakistan and other places, because it's actually a way of saying, hey, this is someone who deserves respect. So if I'm wearing an abaya, there will be at least, you know, a 4 or 5 inch kind of perimeter around me. Men will not get close to me. I wore an abaya. Both of our boys were born in Qatar, and I wore an abaya both times because the abaya is like a big symbol of like, stop, come no closer. And when you're pregnant, that's exactly what you want, because people, you said you had kids, so I'm sure your wife went through things of, people saying all kinds of crazy things to her about her pregnancy. Is she having twins? Is she still pregnant? Why isn't she delivered? And then touching. The amount of touching that happens with pregnant women without their asking them was unbelievable to me. And so I actually, I think that Americans would be very interested to understand the complexities of wearing the scarf and of modest clothing, and to understand that those choices aren't necessarily, I would say for 95% of the women, forced on them, that they are choosing that themselves.
It's fascinating, Dr. Mohana, that you say that, because before I traveled to the Gulf, when I would see somebody in the States with a scarf on, my first reaction was oppression. They're oppressed. Like somebody's making them do that. Misconception, uneducated, ridiculous, yes. But misconception, and I don't think I'm alone in that. And so I'm glad that you bring that out, because probably that's the way a lot of Americans feel when they see a Muslim woman with a scarf. They think, well, somebody's making them do that, or they have to do it, they don't want to. And somehow it's a level of oppression. But what you're saying now is it's, for 95%, you said it's simply by choice and expression of their faith. And I think that can definitely work towards changing attitudes towards that. Let me ask you I've only got a minute here, but let me ask you one other tough question. We don't have polygamy in the West. So when husbands take a number of wives, more than one, a lot of people in the West, especially in the United States, are very uncomfortable with that. How does the Muslim women deal with that? And is that just part of the culture in some areas?
Oh, I would say the attitude towards polygamy is the same attitude towards the veil. There's a lot of, we probably don't have enough time to get into all of it, but there's a lot of things to suggest that the reason why polygamy was first allowed is that, back when Muhammad was founding Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, he could tell that there was a disproportionate number of women to men. And of course, we know, women could not support themselves economically. They didn't necessarily have jobs. And so that polygamy has its roots in a socioeconomic structure to make sure that women are taken care of. Now, if you look at places like the Gulf, and specifically Qatar now, all of my Qatari friends, male and female, understand that they will be in monogamous relationships. All of my female friends, want to be and will negotiate to be the only wife. And it is such that, lifestyles and family and all of that nowadays, that a man, the average Muslim man can probably only afford one wife and one set of children. Whereas in the past, if you were a very wealthy man in Qatar or anywhere else, and indeed even now, one of the ways to show that you were very wealthy was to have, up to 4 wives. And then another way for rulers and politicians to build political capital with other people was to take wives from many tribes, right? So that all those tribes that they had married into would then have loyalty for them. So I think the veil and polygamy, you said uneducated. I wouldn't say uneducated. It's just we react to things based on our frame of reference, right? And in the West, it's all about display. It's all about me. We're certainly seeing that now, right? I think, Kylie Jenner is on her way to being the youngest billionaire. She's not quite there, but Forbes magazine came out yesterday and said, had her on the cover. And how did she do that? Through a makeup empire. And so when you come from a culture where it's all about display, and then you suddenly go into a culture where it's much more about family and it's about groups and it's not about I, but it's about us, I think that's a big shift. And the only, we read it through our lens, and our lens is, oh, they're being forced to do that. Whereas, we could be encouraged to think of it as there are other ways to do things, and there are multiple reasons for the way things are. So we could be a little bit more curious, I think.
Fascinating. I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and I learned a lot. You know, even though I travel to different places and I've been to the Gulf now and try to open my eyes, this has been a fascinating discussion, and you've taught me a lot, and I really appreciate it. And I, for one, am going to buy your book, Love Comes Later. Now, I'm not one to read romantic novels, so it's going to be the first one I've ever read, ever in my life. I'm going to read yours because I've really enjoyed our time together. And then I'll see if I can get to Pearls to the Past. But it's going to be the first romantic novel I've ever read in my life, and I'm 60, all because of you, Dr. Mohana.
Wow, we love to hear that. But maybe what you could do then, I mean, I'm not to take away from your challenge, but you could try The Migrant Report, which is the first book in my crime series. And there's a very plucky female self-appointed sidekick who is, they're two main characters, and she's a young Qatari woman. So maybe if Love Comes Later is not to your taste, check out The Migrant Report. It's the Crimes in Arabia series.
Yeah, but wait a minute. You know, I'm going on for a few days. If I get your book now shipped to me, could you imagine I'm sitting at the pool with my wife, who's expecting me to be reading some, you know, book on trade or politics or, you know, what Trump just did. And there I am reading this romantic novel. She'd be like, whoa, my husband has transformed himself. Good things may come to that. Right. I'm buying your book, and I'm going to prominently display it.
You need to send me a photo of that, okay?
I'm going to prominently display it. And I think good things. I'm going to shock my wife. She's going to think, oh, my husband's like a changed man. So that's what I'm going to do. Dr. Ma, I've never read one, so she'll be so impressed. Dr. Mohana, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much.